Okay, here we go. So this week we're going over part 2 and part 3 of the Boosting Achievement book. Remember that we are using the second edition, and I know last week there were some differences between the first edition and second edition. So hopefully we've got that figured out. And if you don't have the book yet, that's absolutely fine. If you're not going to get it, also absolutely fine. But the book does have a lot of resources in it, so I encourage you to get it. Part 2 is understanding grit and growth mindset. Again, I'm going to kind of go through a little fast. Last week we only went through one part, and this week we've got 2, and we're running late. So let's get started. So what exactly is grit? I think we kind of all know. So when it comes to teaching, it's like someone's passion and motivation and persistence. So our kids, our SLIFE kiddos and a lot of other kids, they come with that grit. And that grit is going to be a predictor for their success if they can keep that up. Okay. So, so our job is to motivate them to continue putting in that persistence so that they continue to grow. So again, teacher's main job, motivation. So we're going to start with this. How can we motivate our students? Okay, so real quick, again, I don't mean to go too quick, but what I want you to think about, what is one thing that you have done in your classroom or that in a classroom you've been a part of that has worked or that has not worked, or one that you've talked about and you thought was going to be a good idea. Maybe you haven't tried it yet, or anything like that. So if you could just put it in the chat. So one way I found to motivate my students is by, or you can use whatever. If you want a sentence stem, use that. If you do not, use your own. Okay, so let's start with that. How have you motivated students or heard of someone motivating students? And this is not just ESL, excuse me, any student. Adult students, doesn't matter. Also, if you haven't signed the attendance sheet, this would be a good time to do that as well. Okay. So you guys are awesome. I expected that, but building relationships, giving choices, making connections, all of those are great. Other simple ones, Fun Friday, definitely, especially with, yeah, well, with all kids, but as I say, in the younger grades, that works crazy well. With the older students, sometimes they need something more instant sometimes. But I was surprised I didn't hear candy competition. That one I think came up once. Positive notes, something simple like that can also be a motivating thing for students to get, depending on the students, obviously. But that's what we're going to be talking about first. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Salva goes into the most important for our multilingual learners is that they need to know 4 things: that they're important, that what they're learning is important, that they can do it, and that we're not going to give up on them. Along with that, they need to know the power of a growth mindset. I might have jumped something, but that's fine. So the growth mindset is that they can do this hard work, and that we will help them through it. Okay. So along with her message, it's that we're going to help them and they can do it. Okay. So with that mindset, we as teachers need to realize a few things. We can't underestimate any student's strong desire to learn. That is hard when you're looking at a student and it doesn't seem like they want to do certain things. They don't want to learn, but we can't underestimate that. Okay. We must educate students on the power of grit and growth mindset and how, if they have that, they can accomplish great things. Okay. But along with that one, we have to understand that grit and mindset are not always enough. Not alone, they are not. Okay. We have to give them the tools that they need in order to achieve what they can. Okay. We need to use examples of success that promote that growth mindset. And then we also need to teach metacognitive strategies. Okay. All of these are on page 49 of the book and goes into another one. Okay. So ways, this one is fun, I think. Okay. So encouraging curiosity, creativity, and global thinking. These are Carol's, her ways to encourage the students the most in her classroom. So gamify the classroom. So there are tons of different ways to do this. There are a lot of different games, game systems, websites that are free now. Some of them still cost, but Kahoot, Blookit, GymKit, which GymKit, the basic version is free and it does cost for a little bit more. And that one was a little confusing for my students, so I didn't use that too much, but I've heard great things. You stick with it. Quizlet, if you haven't used the Quizlet, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like live Quizlet and it groups the students for you. That was a game changer for a couple of my classes because they're put into randomized groups. They don't get to choose them. And then they have to work together to answer the questions. It's not, Quizlet with the flashcards. And so they're answering questions about vocabulary and things like that. My rule was you could never touch someone else's computer. So like other people could help students that were struggling, but the student that was struggling was ultimately the one that had to answer. Quizzes, Class Dojo, more of a gamifying as a whole, but also gamifying. And then there's another one called Class Point that I've heard some good things about, but I haven't heard a lot overall about that one. I did read an interesting article that made everything, because I use all these things in my classroom and it's always fun, but there's always a winner. And especially when you have a higher student that always seems to win. The one thing that it said to keep in mind with the gamifying of your classroom is to make sure that kids can earn points based off of just their accomplishments. So did they do this? Yes, no, they got the point, they didn't. They have 100% control over their points. And so when you're gamifying a classroom for that motivation, that's something you definitely want to take into account. Okay. Another one of Carol's strategies is mystery Skype, which is really kind of cool. So finding professionals, it does take time. I'll give it that. Finding professionals, authors, librarian, government officials, if possible, business owners, chefs, any professional, or even not professional, but someone that is good at something, and Skyping with them. You can make it into she made it into a 20 question game. And so the students had to ask questions to this professional to figure out exactly what their job was or what they were working on, things like that. Virtual field trips, those are getting easier and easier, especially to, museums and things like that. And then this one is not always possible, but
Did
she
you get it?
newspaper
Where
and
is it?
she made sure she went to them and asked them to feature her SLIFE students in those newspapers. So again, it was showing that they were part of that community. And it was another motivating tool to answer the questions in English and all that. So, okay, now we're getting to the social contract. We touched on it just barely last week, but I'm interested to know, because again, you guys, a lot of you have been in the classroom for a long time and are amazing, it seems. Has anyone used a social contract in their class? Okay, if you did, how did it work? So you're not necessarily coming up with all the rules. There's always going to be some rules that are teacher given. But did you ever use a social contract about how they're going to interact socially so that they have that sense of community? If you have, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, because I would love to hear your feedback. I have tried in the past with SLIFE students, and I obviously did not do it correctly because you can hear certain things, but they didn't have the vocabulary to really come up with it. We'll go over Carol's steps in a minute because with her steps, it makes sense. I didn't have her steps when I tried it. Okay. Well, hopefully someone has tried it. I just can't. Oh, I just couldn't see it. There we go. Oh, that's nice. Maria, that's really good. Christine also. Awesome. Well, Carol's steps are on page 59 of the book. And we're gonna kind of go through them right now. So give me a second. Okay, well, first we're gonna go through the why. Forgot about that one. Sorry. So behavior management, you're setting the clear norms. There's no questions. What happens if this? Well, look at your behavior, the social contract. Okay. The students take ownership of their learning, hopefully. Again, if they're the ones setting the rules, then it's important to them. And they're going to hopefully take heed of those rules. Okay. So again, it's not a set of rules imposed on them. It is a set of rules created by them. That's the empowering part. Okay. So now the how. Okay. So we have to first assume all kids want to learn. And we have to start with these 4 questions. So how do you want to be treated by your peers? How do you think your peers want to be treated by you? How do you want to be treated by the teacher? And how does the teacher want to be treated by you? So we have to go through the questions one at a time and give ample opportunity, ample time. Okay. One thing she does go through is definitely give them access to resources for translation on this one. So Google Translate or whatever you use in your classroom or in your school. Okay. This is where I faltered because I was like, oh, I can't. Well, again, in my schools, I should have waited to do the social contract, but the kids never got their computers or iPads the first week of school. It just wasn't that well organized. So I should have waited and so that they could give that feedback. Okay. Because otherwise they didn't know how to express what they wanted. And then finally, facilitate a class discussion on those norms to make sure that everyone understands with them and agrees with them. Again, if you need to Google Translate, Google Translate. Okay. And yeah, Juliana, that's amazing. So if you haven't read the chat, it's great. Okay. Okay, so that's part 2. Part 3 is accelerating language development. First of all, in the book, I didn't include it here because we don't have time, but Carol includes some QR codes to some videos about Emmanuel, who was a student in her class. And it's Emmanuel when he started in her class, and then a little bit later, and then like at the end or years later. I don't remember, it's been a while, but very good videos. If you haven't watched them, definitely go ahead, because it shows how much a student can learn if with that motivation and the access to those resources. So in part 3, Carol goes into the difference between acquiring a language and learning a language. So, and the way I remember it is my child is learning a language. They study their, I wish they studied their vocabulary. They produce small written, prompts that the teacher assigns. But the problem is my child, they're never gonna be able to be fluent just by studying that grammar and vocabulary alone. That was me. I was in high school and I thought I was fluent. I had taken 3 years of Spanish and I knew my stuff. But then I did a study abroad and oh my goodness, no, I knew a fraction. But the studying abroad made me start to acquire the language. Okay. You're getting a lot of input, and slowly but surely, you're given opportunities for, well, not slowly, you're given so many opportunities for interacting that slowly you get better and better and you just acquire that language. Yes, it still takes a lot of work, but that's the difference. So our students, our ESL students, are acquiring that language. Okay. So along with that, we need to make sure that we are giving our students the comprehensible input that they need. Okay, so any message, it's understandable to the student because of context. It's not too difficult, but it's also not too easy. If it's too easy, they're not gonna be challenged. They're not gonna care too much. Okay, it has to be at the right level for the student. Okay, so we got to challenge them just enough. The students need to have chances for low stress output. Okay, so they need to be able to hear the target language, practice speaking that language. Hopefully they'll notice their own errors and try to correct those when they produce next time, or even if produce it on or correct it on the spot. Okay, so low stress, that's the key for, for our new ESL and new SLAC kids. Okay. So also we need to make sure that we're lowering their affective filter. So along with the low stress, this is also helping that. So avoiding correcting them in public. Obviously some corrections are going to be needed, but only when they're ready. Okay. Not forcing them to speak before they're ready. That doesn't mean letting them sit silently in a corner for 6 months. As long as we've created that relationship with the students, we know when they're ready. Okay. And again, maybe the first time they speak, it's one word, yes, no. Okay. But not forcing them to speak before they're ready. Okay. Allowing the students to seek clarification in their native language. Okay. Yes, that's hard, but again, Google Translate. And if we have that relationship with them, they know when it's appropriate to use that with us, and we can help them with that. Okay. Providing feedback on language production only at that student's level of proficiency. If they're turning in a paragraph and you're correcting, oh, there should be a semicolon here before they can barely write a sentence, well, that's not what we should be focusing on. So it's knowing what to focus on and correcting those errors. Okay? We need to make sure we're providing frequent opportunities for peer interaction, making sure we're creating that welcoming environment and getting to know the kids and their students and guardians, and making sure we have an open relationship with all of those stake shareholders. Okay. Okay, so comprehensible input for life. There's going to be your oral and obviously written. Okay. Stuff. Okay, so making sure that we provide context, we simplify speech, avoid idioms. That's, I think, an obvious one, but it's also very hard when you're like, oh my goodness, this place is a madhouse, and they have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, making sure they have frequent interactions with English speakers at higher levels, but not crazy higher levels. Making sure it's attainable. Okay. Using high interest sources is super important. Closed captioning on YouTube or on a video in English is awesome, so they can see those words as they go by. Another website that Carol brought up was, wasn't high low. Let's see if I can find the name. Oh, I wrote it down. Oh, newsinlevels.com. Sorry. So if you are working on current events and you want something that will impact their life, a lot of current events do, and news in levels, news in levels. I'll make sure to add that to the Wakelet later as well. But it has news stories in 3 different reading levels, and the lowest one is it's not super low, but it's low enough that a lot of kids can get the gist, and then it goes up. It also has it where it reads to them. And then also she shared speak in levels, which is, I think you can get to it from the News in Levels website. It's a link on there. But it's ways to speak and connect to other English speakers around the world, which I thought was really cool. Okay. So that's the high interest sources. Providing stems to help with either written or verbal conversations or assignments. High-low books, shared text, environmental print, books in native languages. Love that one. Just because they're learning English doesn't mean that they should not be using their own language. Encourage both. It will be super important to them in the future. There you go. News in levels. Okay. Compelling output. So we can give students a lot of input, but we always want them to be able to show us what they know. Okay. So oh no. Okay. Well, so input. So we want to have input so interesting that they don't remember that they're learning, or that they don't remember that it's a different language. So they'd be super excited about what's going on. Okay. Page 71 has a lot of examples, but she talks about a personal playlist. And so the kids have to come up with songs in whatever language, and there's certain specifics, and they have to say why. That's part of their list. Let me see, Skypes, videos from previous life students, anything like that, where the kids really tied into it, where they can pick their subjects. Okay. That really helps them with that input. So thinking of your classroom, And again, using that compelling input so we can also get compelling output. What resources have you used in your classroom or seen others use in their classroom that you would consider compelling input? Okay. I'm not gonna, obviously, a lot of us don't have peers with us, so if you would just want to type it in the chat. In past classrooms, higher classrooms, I used Newsella. I would consider, for that class, I would have considered it compelling input, not so much for newcomers because it was too high a level. But what have you used or seen or used, seen or heard used that you would consider compelling input? Okay, so Newsella, songs are always great. Movie clips, the Home Alone, that's a funny one. Listen wise, I'll have to look that one up, but I don't know that one. Song lyrics, yes. Awesome. Okay. Going back to last week, that the making your own Kahoots, oh, the kids love that. Definitely compelling input, even though it doesn't necessarily deal with content. It's a great way to figure out what they can do at the, very quickly. Also, another thing I've used, this was with newcomers. They weren't SLIFE necessarily, but they were newcomers, project-based learning. That one, it was an interesting one, but, and they weren't always interested in it. It was about natural disasters, but so the compelling input kind of wavered sometimes, but when it came down to it, they really enjoyed that one and got a lot out of that one. So anything project-based learning, they usually do well. Now we're jumping to language versus content. Okay. So teaching language versus content. Yes. So teaching language, we use content to teach language. And then, we use language to teach concepts. It's pretty, yeah. So in the graphic below, that's from, I don't remember what page, but that's in page 79. There it is. She breaks into the different duties of, a content area teacher and a ESL teacher or ELD teacher, whatever you guys call it in your district. So we're going to move from that one. There we go. Okay. And she does, once again, talks about assessing SLIFE. She did that last chapter. She does that pretty much every chapter. Okay. So, proficiency levels are going to be important when you're assessing the learners. Making sure that we can create rubrics or assessments to evaluate their knowledge of what was taught. And then creating intervention plans to help our SLIFE students that have those, I don't want to say weird gaps, but the gaps that need to be filled. Okay. So maybe instead of a multiple choice test, it kind of just like, if the kid had an IEP. So maybe instead of instead of 4 options, they have 3. Or if it's a math test, instead of having 10 questions on it, they have 5 or 6 or whatever. Okay. again, maybe they're sorting is a high functioning ability. So maybe they have to sort something and then kind of try to speak through their reasoning rather than go through all the steps on a written paper. Okay. And again, those rubrics to assess those are important so that it's not just based off of what you think. The intervention plans that she talks about, she also talks about how those should already be in place at your school. I know in a lot of schools I've taught at, they were not, but these are not just things that our SLIFE students are experiencing. These gaps are common in English speaking students as well. You know, kids move from one school to another, maybe they weren't taught something, or you know, they missed a little bit of it, or maybe just they didn't understand that bit and so they're still missing it. So hopefully a lot of these intervention plans are established. But either way, they need to be communicated with the student, with the adults in the home, and progress should be monitored and updated with everyone. And communication with everyone is obviously the key. Okay. Okay. I know we went through that super fast. But was there anything that I missed that you know of, or questions that you have on these two sections of the book, these two parts, as she calls them? If there are, please put them in the chat. Again, I know we sped through it, but I didn't want to go over our allotted 45-ish minutes of time. So hopefully you got something good out of it. Next week, we're going to go over sections 4 and 5. Section 4 is by far the longest part in the book, the longest chapter in the book. And then section 5 is pretty long as well. So I'm going to be picking and choosing the different things that we go over, the different strategies. So again, if you have a chance to get the book, you probably want it so that so if there's gaps in what I'm talking about, you can go through it. Okay. Okay. So that is it for today. Again, hopefully see you next week at 3:30. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the hopefully good weather. Yes, there's a sign-in sheet on the Wakelet. If you give me a second, I can link it to it. Just a second. There you go. And if you need to add a spot at the bottom, just go ahead and add a spot. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Cami, for opening the Zoom. Samantha and Cami, as long as you guys don't have any questions, I'm gonna go ahead and log off. But please feel free to ask anything.
Thanks, I appreciate you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye, Cami. Thanks again for opening the Zoom.